The city hummed with its usual evening rhythm, a symphony of car horns and distant chatter that meant nothing to Valentino Moretti. Inside his restaurant, Bella Not, a different kind of music played. The soft clink of fine silverware against porcelain, the low murmur of well-dressed guests, and the gentle melody of a violin from a corner quartet. This was his kingdom, a place of polished surfaces and unspoken rules. From a large, one-way mirror that looked like a simple painting from the dining room, Val watched it all. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cool control that his employees and associates had learned never to question. He was a man who owned the room without even having to be in it. On this particular night, his sharp eyes scanned the room out of habit, not interest. They passed over politicians, socialites, and couples celebrating anniversaries. And then, they stopped. In a quiet corner booth, tucked away as if trying to disappear into the plush velvet, sat a woman alone. This was unusual. People did not come to Bella Not alone. She wasn't looking at her phone. Instead, she was frowning at a small notebook, a pencil tucked behind her ear, her brow furrowed in concentration. A single, untouched glass of water sat before her. She was different. That was his first, clear thought. She wore a simple, clean dress, not the expensive cocktail dresses of the other women. Her hair was pulled back in a slightly messy way, as if she had been working hard and had forgotten about it. And she was beautiful, not in the polished, sharp way he was used to, but in a softer, more real way. It was the kind of beauty that didn't seem to know it existed. He watched as a waiter approached her, and he saw her look up and smile. It was a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes, completely changing her face. The waiter, a usually stern man, actually smiled back. Valentino felt something unfamiliar, a small tug of curiosity deep in his chest. He continued to observe her. He saw her nervously tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. He saw the way she bit her lip as she looked over her notebook, her shoulders slumping just a little. She looked tired. She looked worried. But even with the worry etched on her face, there was a strength there, a resilience in the way she sat up straight and took a deep breath, as if giving herself a silent pep talk. No one came to his restaurant to look over work papers. No one came here to be brave by themselves. Who was she? Without taking his eyes off her, Valentino pressed a small, almost invisible button on his desk. The door to his office opened silently and his most trusted bodyguard, a mountain of a man named Luca, stepped inside. Luca stood quietly, waiting for his boss to speak. The silence in the room was heavy. Finally, Valentino spoke, his voice low and steady, each word chosen with care. The woman in the corner booth. The one with the notebook. He paused for a single heartbeat, his gaze still fixed on her. Bring her to me. Luca simply nodded. Yes, sir. He turned and left the room as quietly as he had entered. Down in the dining room, Siena Rossi was trying very hard not to be overwhelmed. This had been a mistake. The restaurant was far too fancy for her. She had just wanted one nice meal to celebrate, or maybe to comfort herself, after the whirlwind of finally opening her own little bakery, the Sugar Rose. But now, surrounded by so much quiet luxury, she felt completely out of place. She was calculating how much her simple pasta would cost and whether it was worth dipping into her tiny savings. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the large, well-dressed man approaching her table until he was standing right beside her. Miss? Luca's voice was polite but firm, leaving no room for casual conversation. Siena looked up, startled. Yes? The owner of the establishment would like a word with you, Luca said, his face giving nothing away. Siena's heart jumped. The owner? Had she done something wrong? Was her dress not fancy enough? A wave of panic washed over her. The owner? Why? Is there a problem? Luca offered a small, professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He did not say, "Please, follow me." He gestured away from the main dining room. Feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach, Siena slowly closed her notebook and stood up. Every eye in the restaurant seemed to be on her, though in reality, no one was paying attention. She felt like she was walking to the principal's office, but 1,000 times more intimidating. Luca led her through a discreet door marked private, down a richly carpeted hallway, and toward a heavy, dark wooden door. He knocked once and then opened it, gesturing for her to enter. Siena stepped inside, and the door closed softly behind her. The office was unlike any room she had ever seen. It was large and opulent, with dark wood, shelves filled with books, and a large, imposing desk. And behind that desk sat the most intimidating man she had ever laid eyes on. He was handsome, with sharp features and dark, intense eyes that were now studying her with an unnerving focus. He didn't smile. He simply watched her, making her feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. "Please, sit down," Valentino said, his voice a low rumble that filled the quiet room. Siena nervously sat in the large leather chair opposite him, feeling very small. She clutched her notebook to her chest like a shield. "My name is Valentino Moetti," he said. "This is my restaurant." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I noticed you dining alone. That is unusual for Bella not." Siena's mind raced. Was that a crime? I just wanted a quiet dinner," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Valentino's eyes flicked down to the notebook she was clutching. "You are working in my restaurant. Most people come here to escape work." His tone wasn't angry, it was probing, curious. Something about his directness sparked a flicker of defiance in Siena. She was tired, she was stressed, and she was tired of feeling small. She lifted her chin just a little. "I was finalizing some plans for my new business," she said, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "I just opened a bakery a few blocks from here. The Sugar Rose. I thought I could treat myself." "A bakery," Valentino repeated, the word sounding foreign and interesting on his tongue. He looked at her with new interest. The pieces began to fit together. The tiredness, the simple dress, the worry. She was an entrepreneur, fighting for her dream. He knew that fight well. "And how is business for the Sugar Rose?" Siena hesitated, unsure how much to share with this formidable stranger. But the weight of her struggles pressed down on her, and the words tumbled out. "It's hard," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "It's just me. The rent is high, and it's difficult to get people to notice a small, new shop. I was actually just in here trying to decide if I could afford the risotto." She gave a small, self-conscious laugh. Her honesty was like a breath of fresh air in his controlled, secretive world. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't afraid to admit she was struggling. Valentino felt that strange pull of curiosity again, stronger this time. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the passion in her eyes when she mentioned her bakery, the faint trace of flour on her sleeve, the determined set of her jaw even as she admitted her fears. He was silent for a long moment, his mind working. This was not his usual way of doing business. He operated on threats and deals, not on feelings. But something about Siena Rossi made him want to break his own rules. "I have a proposition for you," he said finally, leaning forward. His dark eyes locked with hers. "Bella not currently gets its desserts from a large supplier in another city. They are adequate, but not special." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Starting next week, the Sugar Rose will become the exclusive supplier of pastries and desserts for this restaurant." Siena stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. She was sure she had misheard him. This had to be a joke. "What?" she breathed. I don't understand. You don't even know if my baking is any good." A ghost of a smile, the first she had seen, touched Valentino's lips. "We will soon find out. This is a business offer, Siena. Your bakery is local. Your story is compelling. It is good for my restaurant to support local businesses." It was only half the truth, and he knew it. The other half was that he wanted to see her again. He wanted to see what she could do. Siena's head was spinning. This offer, from a man like him, could change everything. It would guarantee her a steady income, it would give her shop a famous client, it would save her business. But a voice in the back of her head whispered a warning. Men like Valentino Moetti did not do things out of the kindness of their hearts. What was the catch? She looked into his intense, unreadable eyes, searching for an answer. She saw power and danger there. But she also saw something else, something she couldn't quite name. It was a spark of genuine interest. Taking a deep breath, and against all her better judgment, Siena Rossi made a decision that would change her life forever. "Okay," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's a deal." The morning after her encounter with Valentino Moetti, Siena Rossi's small bakery was filled with a new kind of energy. It was no longer just the quiet hum of hope and fear, but the electric crackle of a looming deadline. He had not been joking. At precisely 7 a.m., a sleek, black car pulled up outside the Sugar Rose, and the imposing figure of Luca stepped out. He entered the shop with a quiet nod, his presence immediately shrinking the cozy space. He was there to collect the first sample delivery, a silent, living reminder that her agreement with Valentino was real, and that it came with a world of unspoken expectations. Siena had been awake since 4, her hands moving in a frantic, flour-dusted ballet. She wasn't just baking for a customer anymore, she was baking for a man who saw straight through her. She had chosen a delicate lemon ricotta cake, its flavor both bright and comforting, and a batch of dark chocolate amaretti cookies, sophisticated in their bitterness. She packaged them in a simple white box, her hands trembling slightly as she tied the string. Handing it to Luca felt like handing over a piece of her soul for judgment. He took it without a word and left, the bell on the door jingling a somber tune in his wake. Later that day, her old, simple phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text was brief and to the point. The cake was satisfactory. Provide 3 dozen of the cookies for Friday evening. VM. Siena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Satisfactory. It wasn't a glowing review, but it was a start. It was a foot in the door of a world she had never imagined being part of. This became their new, unspoken rhythm. Every morning, Luca would arrive to pick up the day's samples. Every afternoon, a text would arrive on Siena's phone with feedback and the next day's order. Valentino's messages were always formal, always brief. The pastry was too sweet. The texture of the croissant was correct. Increase the order for the weekend. Siena began to live and breathe by these texts, her entire day's mood hinging on his terse, clinical approvals. But then, the rhythm began to change. One afternoon, instead of a text, her phone rang. It was him. His voice, a low rumble even through the phone, asked a question not about the food, but about the craft. The orange zest in the biscotti, he began, is it candid or fresh? The question surprised her so much she fumbled her answer. She explained the process of using fresh zest for the oil and a tiny bit of candied peel for texture. He was silent for a moment, then simply said, I see. It creates a complexity. Good. And he hung up. That single good felt more rewarding than any payment. The next day, he called again. This time, he was at the restaurant, looking at the delivery of bomboloni she had sent. You filled them with a vanilla custard, he stated. Yes, Siena replied, her heart pounding. Is there a problem? No, he said, and she could almost hear the thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. It is just unexpected. Most would use a simple jam. It is more ambitious. I appreciate ambition. Their conversation slowly stretched from 2 minutes to 10, from 10 to 20. They stopped being only about baking. He began to ask about her day, about the challenges of running a small shop. He shared, in his own reserved way, small pieces of his own world. He told her about a difficult supplier he had to deal with, framing it in terms she would understand, comparing it to her own struggles with finding quality ingredients. He never mentioned the darker side of his business, but the shadow of it lingered in his stories, in the way he spoke about leverage and respect. Siena found herself looking forward to these calls. The powerful, intimidating Mafia boss was slowly fading, replaced by a man named Val who was sharp, perceptive, and surprisingly knowledgeable about food. She started baking with him in mind, trying to imagine his reaction, wanting to surprise him. She developed a new recipe for a blood orange and rosemary tart, something bold and a little unusual. When he called after tasting it, he didn't just say it was good. He said, the rosemary was a risk. It reminds me of the hills in Sicily. No one has brought me a taste of a memory before. In that moment, the last of her fear began to melt away, replaced by a dangerous and growing affection. One evening, as Siena was closing the bakery, wiping down the counters in the warm, sugary glow of the evening sun, the bell on the door chimed. She turned, expecting a last-minute customer, and her breath caught in her throat. Valentino Moretti stood in her doorway. He was out of place in her simple, flower-dusted world, his expensive coat and sharp demeanor contrasting sharply with the homey, rustic decor. He didn't say anything at first, just looked around, his eyes taking in the small tables, the display case, the chalkboard menu. I was in the neighborhood, he said, his voice softer than she remembered. Siena just stared, a clean rag frozen in her hand. Would you like a coffee? It's not as fancy as what you have at Bellanot, she offered, her voice a little shaky. He nodded. That would be nice. She busied herself with the espresso machine, her back to him, hyper-aware of his presence filling her quiet shop. When she turned to hand him the small cup, she saw he was looking at a framed photo on the wall. It was a picture of her and her grandmother, both covered in flour, laughing in a kitchen that looked very much like this one. She taught me, Siena said softly, coming to stand beside him. He looked from the photo to her. I can see that, he said. The same smile. He sipped his coffee, and a genuine, slow smile spread across his own face. It transformed him, making him look younger, less like a boss and more like a man. "This is excellent coffee." They talked then, not on the phone, but face to face. He asked about her grandmother. She asked about Italy. The conversation flowed easily, naturally. The professional barrier between them had completely dissolved. As dusk settled outside, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Valentino stood to leave. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. "The tart," he said, looking back at her. "It was the best thing I have ever tasted." And then he was gone. Siena stood alone in the middle of her bakery, the air still charged with his presence. She knew, with a terrifying and thrilling certainty, that this was no longer just a business arrangement. She was falling for Valentino Moretti, and the sheer, dizzying danger of that truth was the most exciting thing she had ever felt. The following week, the fragile new world they were building almost shattered. Siena was making a delivery to Bella not herself during the day, bringing in a large, multi-layered cassata cake for a private event. As she was leaving through the kitchen's back entrance, a man she had never seen before stepped into her path. He was dressed in a cheap, flashy suit, and his smile was a predatory sneer. This was Silas, a rival of Valentino's. Well, Silas said, his voice slick and unpleasant. "You must be the little baker who's caught the great Moretti's eye. I have to say, I expected more." Siena froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Excuse me, I need to go." "Don't be in such a rush," he said, stepping closer, invading her space. "I just want to talk. I'm a businessman, like Val. Maybe we can do business too. It must be tough, running that little shop all by yourself. Things can happen. Ovens can break. Windows can crack." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. Just then, the kitchen door swung open and Valentino emerged. The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous and chilling. His face, which had recently been soft with smiles for her, was now a mask of pure, cold fury. His eyes locked onto Silas, and the air itself seemed to grow still. "Silas," Valentino's voice was quiet, but it carried a lethal edge. "You are on the wrong side of my door. You are speaking to the wrong person. Walk away. Now." The two men stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Siena saw a side of Valentino she had only heard whispers of, the ruthless Mafia boss, a man of violence and power. It was terrifying. After a long, tense moment, Silas smirked, gave a mock salute, and slunk away. Valentino turned to Siena. His anger was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling intensity. "Did he touch you?" he asked, his voice rough. Siena shook her head, unable to speak. "Good," he said. He took her by the elbow, his grip firm but not painful, and guided her to his car, instructing Luca to drive her back to her bakery himself. He didn't say another word, but the protective, possessive energy radiating from him was overwhelming. Back in the safety of her shop, Siena trembled. The reality of his world had just reached out and touched her, and it was ugly and frightening. That night, she sent him a text. "I think this is getting too complicated. Maybe it's better if we end our business arrangement." His reply was immediate. It wasn't a text. It was his voice on the phone. "Siena, open your door." She went to the door and unlocked it. He was standing there, on her doorstep, his hair slightly messy as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly. He wasn't the boss here. He was just a man. "I am not a good man, Siena," he said, his voice raw, his gaze burning into hers. "The world I live in is not a good world. It is full of men like Silas. It is full of shadows. But when I am with you, when I taste your food, when I hear your voice, for the first time in my life, I feel like I am standing in the sun." He took a step closer, close enough for her to feel the heat from his body. "You asked me once why I chose you. It is because you are the only real thing I have ever known." He didn't wait for her answer. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle, and he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, passionate, all-consuming kiss that held a lifetime of loneliness and a fierce, burning hope. It was a kiss that held the spice of danger and the pure, sweet promise of something new. It was a kiss that held every unspoken word between them. And when Siena wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, she knew there was no going back. She was choosing the shadows, because for the first time, they were filled with light. The world for Siena and Valentino had irrevocably shifted after the kiss that sealed her choice. The cautious dance was over, replaced by a fierce, open connection that burned with an intensity that scared and thrilled them both. Valentino, a man who had built his life on walls and shadows, found himself willingly dismantling them, brick by brick, for the woman who baked sunshine into her pastries. He no longer kept his distance. He began to appear at her bakery not just at closing time, but in the quiet lulls of the afternoon, sitting at a small table with a cup of her strong coffee, simply watching her work. He was a silent, protective presence, a king visiting his queen in her own vibrant, flower-dusted kingdom. Siena, in turn, learned to navigate the complex, often frightening, reality of his world. The incident with Silas had been a harsh lesson, but it had also shown her the depth of Valentino's protection. Luca was now a permanent, if discreet, fixture near her bakery, a silent guardian against the threats that lurked in the periphery of Val's empire. She learned to ignore the whispers that followed her when she visited Bellanot, the curious and sometimes fearful glances from men in expensive suits who now treated her with a deference that was meant for him. Her love for him was a choice she reaffirmed every day, a conscious decision to embrace the man, shadows, and all. Their relationship became a tapestry woven from two different worlds. He taught her about fine wine, his voice a low, captivating murmur as he explained the nuances of a particular vintage from a small vineyard he owned in Tuscany. She taught him the simple joy of eating a warm, buttery croissant straight from the oven, his usually serious face softening with genuine pleasure. He brought her to art galleries, pointing out paintings with a keen, educated eye. She brought him to the bustling morning market, her hand firmly in his, laughing as he tried to haggle with a vegetable vendor for the first time in his life. They were two halves of a whole, each finding completion in the other's foreignness. But the shadow of Silas had not receded, it had only grown longer and more menacing. He saw Valentino's open affection for Siena not as a weakness to be mocked, but as the ultimate vulnerability to be exploited. He began a campaign of subtle terror. A brick was thrown through the window of the Sugar Rose one night. A delivery of spoiled milk was sent to the bakery, nearly ruining a day's worth of work. Each incident was a pinprick, a reminder that Silas was watching and waiting. Valentino's fury was a cold, contained storm. He doubled Siena's security and launched his own countermeasures against Silas's operations, but the rival boss was cunning, his attacks designed to be irritating and untraceable, a psychological war meant to fray their nerves. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Siena was working late, perfecting a new recipe for a honey and pistachio cake. The bakery was closed, the open sign flipped off, the world outside a blur of wet streets and neon reflections. She was alone, having insisted to Luca that she was fine for just a few more minutes. The back door, which led to a quiet alley, was locked, or so she thought. The sound of the lock turning with a soft, metallic click made her blood run cold. She turned from her mixing bowl to see the door swing open, and Silas stepped inside, followed by two of his brutish associates. Rain dripped from his coat onto her clean floor. "Little baker," he sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. "Working so hard. It's a shame. This place is about to have a very unfortunate accident. A gas leak, perhaps. Very dangerous." Siena's heart pounded in her throat, a frantic, terrified drum. But as she looked at his smug, cruel face, something inside her snapped. This was her sanctuary, the manifestation of her grandmother's dream and her own hard work. She would not let him destroy it. She would not be the helpless victim he wanted her to be. Her fear crystallized into a sharp, clear anger. "A gas leak," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She took a step back, her hand closing around the heavy, marble rolling pin on the counter. "You're not here for an accident, Silas. You're here because you're scared of him. You can't beat Valentino as a man, so you try to hurt him through me. That doesn't make you strong. It makes you pathetic." Her words hit their mark. Silas's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of fury. He took a threatening step forward. "You have a big mouth for someone who's about to." He never finished his sentence. In that moment, the front window of the bakery exploded inwards in a shower of glass. The air was filled with a deafening roar and the blinding glare of headlights. Valentino didn't just arrive, he erupted onto the scene. He had been circling the block, a habit he'd developed since the harassment began, and had seen the shadows moving inside. He didn't wait for his men. He drove his car directly through the front of her shop. The world descended into chaos. Val was out of the car before the glass had settled, his face a terrifying mask of primal rage. He moved with a brutal, efficient speed Siena had never witnessed. He wasn't the polished restaurant owner or the gentle lover, he was a force of nature. He disarmed one of Silas's men with a sickening crack of bone, sending the man crumpling to the floor. The other associate froze for a critical second, stunned by the car now parked in the middle of the bakery, and that was all the opening Val needed. Silas, panicked, turned to run out the back door, but Siena acted on pure instinct. She swung the heavy rolling pin with all her strength, catching him hard on the shoulder. He cried out in pain and surprise, stumbling, which was all the time Valentino required. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand closing around Silas's throat, slamming him against the wall amidst the wreckage of her display case. The look in Val's eyes promised death. "Val, no." Siena's voice cut through the red haze of his fury. He didn't look at her, his grip tightening. "He threatened you. He came into your home." "I know," she said, stepping closer, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "But if you do this, you become him. You prove him right. This." She gestured at the destroyed bakery, the shattered window letting in the cold night air. "This is just a place. It can be fixed. But if you cross that line for me, we can never come back from it. Your soul can't." Her words were like a bucket of ice water. He looked from Silas's purpling face to Siena's pleading, determined eyes. She wasn't asking him to be weak, she was asking him to be strong in a different way. She was offering him a path out of the darkness, not with a plea, but with a demand for a better life. With a guttural sound of frustration, he released Silas, who collapsed, gasping, to the floor. Just then, Luca and the rest of Val's men swarmed in, securing the scene. Valentino turned to Siena, his chest heaving, his knuckles bloody. He looked at the destruction, at the car sitting where her tables used to be, at the fear and adrenaline still shining in her eyes. "I destroyed your shop," he said, his voice thick with a strange mix of horror and awe. Siena looked around at the wreckage, at the rain now blowing in through the broken window, at the man who had literally driven through a wall for her. And then, she did something completely unexpected. She started to laugh. It was a shaky, slightly hysterical laugh, but it was real. "It's just a window, Val. And you should see the other guys." In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of her old life, they both knew everything had changed. Silas was taken away, not to be buried in an unmarked grave, but to be handed over to the authorities, along with a mountain of evidence Val had been compiling for years. It was Siena's strength, her refusal to let him become a monster, that gave him the final push to sever his ties to his old life completely. He would use the law, not a bullet, to secure their future. 1 year later, the grand reopening of the Sugar Rose was the social event of the season. But it wasn't the same small shop. It was bigger, brighter, and located in a beautiful, historic building that Valentino had quietly purchased and renovated for her. The air was filled with the sweet scent of success and Siena's magnificent pastries. The city's elite mingled with her loyal customers from the old neighborhood. Politicians, artists, and former associates now running legitimate businesses all came to celebrate. Siena stood behind the new, gleaming counter, her hand resting comfortably in Valentino's. He looked at her, not as the Mafia boss who had commanded her to be brought to him, but as a man utterly, completely in love. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear, his voice for her alone. "Bringing you to me was the best order I ever gave," he whispered. She turned her head and kissed him, a soft, promise-filled kiss that spoke of a future built not on fear, but on flour, sugar, and a love that had been forged in fire. They had walked through shadows and emerged, hand in hand, into the sun. This is the story of Valentino and Siena, a tale of how the most unexpected meeting can change 2 lives forever. Their journey was filled with danger, passion, and the sweet taste of redemption. If you were captivated by their love story and want to discover more tales of fierce love, unexpected twists, and hearts finding their perfect match, make sure to subscribe. A world of unforgettable romance awaits, and you won't want to miss a single story. Subscribe now.